I think communication is a big part of it. And I always tell my team, if they're coming to us asking a question, we're not doing our job and we're not telling them enough information so they are feeling out of the loop. Even if it is, hey, we're still waiting for XYZ to come in, ETA is this, and have a great week.
Well, very excited for the podcast today. We have Lexi Westergard on. Welcome, Lexi.
Hi, Brad. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we're excited. So you are owner and principal designer at Lexi Westergard Design. And
Yes.
I think what's awesome about bringing you on, you have a very unique group of networking designers here, which I think is pretty rare, for a long time, many builders, many designers, they're not a close knit group yet. I've had Jenny from Black Ink and Brittany Simon and Jamie Rose. And now Lexi, all of us have worked together over the years, and now all of you have made an appearance here on the podcast, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I would be nowhere without my design mastermind. We have a good time together, and it's awesome to have a network of designers that you can, bounce ideas off, and really they've been instrumental in helping build my business for sure.
It's so important. It's funny because recently had Jamie Rose on for a second time, and she mentioned that sometimes like she just needs an outlet, because as an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
it's like it's lonely. Like your, your demeanor can change every 5 minutes. You could be really high, really low. It can change quickly. And sometimes you don't want the team to know like all the things you're dealing with. So that's why you have each other.
Yeah, I think so. And no one knows what you're going through unless they've been there. And even my husband, who owns his own business, he can't relate because it's a different industry. And I feel like design is such a unique industry for sure.
So how depth, it's one thing to understand, okay, to your point, we're all in the same industry. We have some similar pain points, maybe, some contractor or client horror stories, maybe architect, that we can, share with each other to pivot through. How deep do you get as far as pricing and budgets and what you charge clients? And, I'm sure you're not sharing financials, but how much are you willing to share with your colleagues there?
We share everything. So pricing, um, processes. I mean, get into nitty gritty, even like back end stuff, like hiring employees, like NDAs. I'm like, what NDA do you have? And then, we share a lot of things actually and are super open with each other, which I think is really unique if you find that group that you feel comfortable sharing those things, especially because we are in the same area. I think that can be tricky, but I think that all there's enough clients for everyone, and we all kind of have our own little unique styles that, Jenny's client's probably not going to be my client and things like that. Although we have had where they've reached out to multiple of us and we're like, hey, oh, I'm up for that job too, and then of course someone else may get it, and you're happy for them though, because I would rather have them have the client than another designer for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the only way I can relate it is, locally, I have a great network of builders here, and we will share trade partners and suppliers and, in some cases, employees move back and forth. You kind of see that.
Yeah.
Whereas on a national level, I'm part of a Builder 20, and the Builder 20 is exceptional because with the Builder 20, very similar. We're diving into financials and we're sharing documents, and, we have NDAs we sign with each other. It's a very transparent process, right? And I feel like it's really helped me grow my business and help AFT really go to the next level. You're doing that at a local level, which I feel is pretty rare. You're in the same sandbox, you're competing for some of the same projects. Has it ever, do you feel that it's ever been personal where you are going for the same job? You may lose it. How have you been able to work through the relationship side just to keep a tight knit, open communication with each other?
Yeah, I don't look at them as competition. I think we're here to help each other. And I think when they succeed and, we're all, I think even not even within my mastermind, but the whole community, if we all are kind of at the same range, I think it just builds up our industry versus, creating competition for sure.
Do you have a network of designers outside of Phoenix that you're networking with as well?
Yeah, I think Instagram helps with that. So I've had reached out to, Instagram friends that I met in real life too, or at markets, and yeah, definitely. I think markets are a great way to network as well. We go to all the furniture markets. Well, not all because there's a lot of them, but a lot of the furniture markets. But I mean, I feel like that's super important. And there is something about, I always can know I'm going to get along with a designer. I don't know what it is. I think it's a personality thing. We actually were on Sub Zero Wolf, like a vendor trip, and we all were talking about enneagrams. Are you familiar with enneagrams?
Uh huh.
So it's like the personality test. And
Right.
Kelly from Sub Zero was like, every designer is either 3 or 8. And like most of us there were 8s. And I'm like, okay, this makes sense. So we all kind of like get along. And I don't know, it's just kind of funny. I don't know.
Well, I agree. It's funny. I just, the previous podcast I just had on, Jamar was speaking about, I mean, a small world. We're at different times. We went to the same high school. And he mentioned, people from the same high school, people from, the same industry, there's walks of life where, I think from a design perspective, there's a lot of overlap. I'm sure maybe, we laugh about maybe the pain points with maybe some of your customers, architects, builders, but you're dealing with a lot of the same issues, kind of like we are. When I meet another builder, we can relate because everything seems great on Instagram, but the reality is it's a tough business day to day, right? You're trying
Mm-hmm.
to meet expectations and deadlines and quality and budget. And, there's so many variables. And for you as a designer, I would imagine there's a lot of pain points, not just from beginning at design and budget, but during construction and then furnishings, all the way through.
Yeah, there definitely are. I would not want your job, Brad. I feel like we always say it's like glorified babysitting, trying to deal with all the different trades, and we have done before where we've done smaller like remodels where we'll like kind of oversee some trades, and it's like, no, we're not doing that ever again because it's tough, getting them to respond. And obviously a lot of your trades, you've developed relationships over time, which I think is super important. So they're loyal to you and probably put you first. But yeah, I think it's definitely hard.
Yeah, you'd like to think so, and sometimes it doesn't happen. It's funny.
Construction, it's like the Wild West. Anything goes.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny. I will tell clients, I've done a lot of commercial, early on in my career, especially when I started AFT, we did a lot of commercial early on, and now it's switched over. I mean, we're pretty much 100% residential, at least for the last few years, high end residential. And I always tell clients it's the Wild West. Anyone that's worked in commercial, like it's very formatted. You're working with big subcontractor bases. There's a lot of CYA, just covering
Mhm.
your trail in a way, I guess you could say, to make sure that, all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And so there's a lot of legality part. But the reality is in commercial, when I'm hiring a mechanical subcontractor, they probably have 300 employees. They're big firms. They are very savvy with Procore or, Builder Trend or whatever project management software. They have back end support, but in residential, it is the Wild West. My mechanical guy may have 3 employees, and the owner is doing bidding and he's doing purchasing and he's in the field installing. And so during the day, they have their bags on. It's hard to get a hold of them. And, it's just the Wild West, I think, is a great analogy
Yeah.
there, Lexi, because it's a totally different market and, trade base.
Yeah, for sure.
How's it for
Excuse
you?
me.
I mean, over time, even though you're not doing the builds, how have you built good relationships? Because you're still doing install. There's still a level of whether it's furnishings you're putting in, the FF&E from, mirrors and when you're installing and, there's a lot of stuff that's hands-on from your perspective, as you get in and take possession at the end of the project.
Yeah, I think it's really important as you're working with different vendors to really cultivate those relationships. I mean, our vendors, a good vendor can make or break a project. I try to let our clients know if something could go wrong, it probably will go wrong because there's so many moving parts when it comes to construction and design. And so a lot of times our vendors will help us out, like having things ship quick, or if they can, different things like that, because we have cultivated those good relationships. And another part is our install team. We have scheduling and making sure we want the A team when our installers come. And so we're always like, send us your best people. And because we have a good relationship with the manager and we've always been kind, I think it's important to be kind. And really, I've had talks with the owner of the install team where if something goes wrong, like, hey, as a business owner, I would want to know this. So like, listen, like if you want to keep our business, this is like XYZ needs to happen. And so they're really good at that feedback, but it's a delicate balance. You don't want to come across as too aggressive, but I also want them to know they can't just steamroll me as well.
Walk us through install, because I don't think I've really ever dove in.
Yeah.
What's the word I'm looking for? But anyways, we haven't really
Yeah.
analyzed what install day is like, right? I know
Okay.
from a design perspective, as you show up, you're coordinating. Ideally, the builder's out of the house and they're not in there with 100 trains doing punch work.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a great situation, what does it look like, the coordination from, because you're managing product being delivered over 12 months. It's coming at different stages. You're marketing it. It's all coming out. Walk us through the chaos of an install.
Yeah. Install, that is a perfect example. It's pure chaos. And I feel like we will plan. We plan months in advance for install. We have an install in Flagstaff in a couple weeks. And so we've been planning that for months. And especially the ones that are not local, like we've had one in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And so there's a lot more logistics that go into that, getting all the accessories there prior, and really making sure we have everything buttoned up. But we're scheduling an install team, typically 4 guys. I find that if it's more than 4, you're kind of having a lot of the guys are sitting around, if I'm being honest. And I'm like, hey, come on, let's get going. I'm bossy. It's a good quality that I had when I was a kid, and it's really translated well as I've owned my own business. But anyway, so we have an install team that they have trucks. Typically that will be depending on the house size. So for instance, we have the Flagstaff project that's about 5,000 square feet, maybe a little under. We have 2 days full for the furniture being delivered. Then we have a separate art installer that we just adore. He's the best. And so we always use him, and he's coming up for a day. Sometimes we also will schedule a furniture repair guy, because things can happen during moving. And these are all things that we really try to educate our clients on, like, hey, discrepancies happen and we are going to have them fixed as soon as possible. But this is kind of just the name of the game when things are being moved and shipped, or something might not get caught, but that we want you to know that we're going to acknowledge that and get that taken care of. But yeah, we're moving everything. And my team's we're very hands-on. If we need to move a piece of furniture, we're like, yeah, let's get in there and get it done. Stuffing pillows, making beds. We take all of our bedding and have it be dry cleaned prior. In my early days, we were ironing, and that took forever, and washing. And so it's like, okay, dry cleaner, so we kind of, every project, we're kind of fine-tuning our process and how things run. And we have like a long list of checklists prior to install. Do we have light bulbs? Do we have extension cords? Do we have all the pillow fills? And there's a lot of things. And if it's a second home, we also have clients that maybe need to have dishes and all of that stuff as well. And so we will move those things in too. It just takes a little bit longer, but we're happy to do that as well.
You bring up a good point, Lexi, because as many times as I've been through installs with designers, it's just something, I don't want to say taken for granted, you just don't think of from the outside perspective, and maybe the client. When you mentioned, because I've been there and I've seen where designers, they may have a steamer and they're touching something up, but to have sheets already cleaned and washed and bedding ready.
Hmm.
I mean, usually, for us, we're just taking it out of the package and putting it in, but you're like, no, this has to be cleaned and disinfected and so forth. And so the amount of
Yeah.
coordination, just something that's small to make sure that you're prepped for install so the clients can actually move in and sleep in it and not have to take apart their bedding and wash it for the first time.
Yeah, for sure. And we are full service, so that's our specialty, is creating a turnkey experience so they can just come in and move their belongings. So,
I love the example of bringing someone who can repair furniture. Early on, it's interesting how our careers evolve as far as communication with the client. And what I mean by that is early on, especially being a cost plus contractor, it was really difficult to communicate to the client that, hey, we're having open surgery in your house, right? And because from a cost plus perspective, when I was bidding early on, you would have your drywall bid, you would put that in the contract, and then of course, you would always have dings and things that don't fit right, cabinetries that goes in, and countertops are set completely flush, and so they may nick the drywall as they're setting that massive, heavy countertop in place, right?
hmm.
That's supposed to fit perfect, and a trade may walk through and bump the wall with his bag or whatever, and you realize that there is nuance, right? You're building a home over 2 years, most likely. There's probably 6 months there at drywall, you know, stage where things can happen. And you learn to communicate to the client that, yeah, the bid may be 50,000, but we're going to carry 55,000 in the line. And they're like, okay, why? Well, again, this is protocol. Like
Hmm.
things will happen. This is not coming off a manufacturing line. It's done by hand. There may be areas we have to, where the texture is too heavy. We typically are doing a smooth drywall where you may feel like there's too many pits and we have to smooth that over. And so you become better explaining this stuff. How's that been for you? At this point, Lexi 2.0 today, as opposed to maybe early on, communicating the things that are going to go wrong because they have gone wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of two parts, because part of my job is to handle those things on the back end and the client won't even know about it, right? So we might have an issue with the fabric being discontinued and we can find it from another vendor that's very similar. The client doesn't even have to know about it, but we kind of work behind scenes to get that taken care of. So that's kind of interesting. And I almost probably should communicate that more, like, hey, this happened this week, just so you know, but we don't communicate all of those things. But then I also am super big on communication and transparency. I think maybe, actually, I know when I first started, I not so much. I would be afraid to have those conversations, where now it's like, hey, we're having the tough conversations now, and I'm going to let you know, like, this is happening, but here's the how this is how we're going to solve it. And so, I mean, we try to prep them for everything, but as you know, you can't. And then I think also just letting them know that this is normal. Like, a lot of home
Yeah.
builders, they've never done it, or not home builders, client home owners, it's their first time ever building a home, and they're not aware of this, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. I'm like, this is actually pretty standard. Like, this is not a big deal. It's okay. And this is how we're going to fix it. Or we'll talk to your contractor. We can get that taken care of so that you're really happy with that. And so I think just really communicating that to them early on as well. I mean, even in our contract, it talks about, the last phase is to walk through discrepancies and like all the different things that can happen, and that we'll get them fixed in a timely manner. But yeah.
You bring up a very good point, Lexi, because there is, call it, air your dirty laundry. I mean, there's a certain aspect of our job that we don't have to share every single thing about how the sausage is made, right? I mean, things
Mm-hmm.
happen. There's coordination between you and I, designer builder, on things that maybe,
Mm-hmm.
hey, there's a discrepancy. We could figure this out without making a big deal to the client. But at the same point, communication is really, I'm going to go back to the drywall example. Early in my career, think of it from a builder perspective. It's very common that there'll be drywall repairs, right? There may be a hole and you repair it. It's really not a big deal. This is something we do every day. We had a client that saw this hole and just completely lost their mind because they're like, I paid for something brand new. Like they're thinking I want a full sheet,
Oh,
repairing this hole. I'm getting something that's, it's not top of the line. It's not what I paid for. Whereas we're like, this is a standard protocol. You repair the drywall. It's not like it's going to deteriorate over time or you're going to see this. I mean, you do the drywall repair right, it's going to be just fine. But the client in
yeah.
their mind is thinking, I paid for this new. I don't want to have a hole there that I know about. And so it's really laying the groundwork on certain things that, hey, these things will come up. Here's how we handle them. There's a process, there's a system, there's, repair. And this is something that we do. And it's very common on every build.
Yeah. Could you imagine if you didn't have any repairs with all those grades in there? That
I
would be
know.
like a miracle. You'd be like, I did it. I'm the best builder ever. Because
Well,
that's impossible.
well, I'll give one more example real quick is back to the drywall. So I had a peer mine and you can imagine there's waste. Like when you bid a job, like you plan for waste because you can't use every little piece. And so they were, hanging drywall. And anyone that's been there, you have odd shapes and sizes, different ceiling heights, and there's soffits and all these. So, they have scraps all around. So this customer went out to the yard and they're counting every piece of scrap, these triangles, these squares, these rect. Yeah. And they're like, I would like a credit for these pieces that are being thrown away to the builder. And it's sometimes it's hard to put yourself in the mind of a client to be like, you know what? This is what they're understanding at their level. In their mind, they're thinking you're being wasteful of their investment. And this is sometimes at the core where we just learn over time how to communicate these things. But it's tough when you're young in your career and you don't know,
Hmm.
and that's to your point, to how we started the conversation. This is why you have Jenny and Jamie and Brittany, because they may have experienced some of these questions from a client like the drywall scrap issue that you haven't had to deal with. And now you know how to answer when it does come up.
So what did you do?
so this so
I'm dying.
so this builder, it actually became very tense. They had to get a third party consultant to actually walk the client through to have the client have peace of mind that this is in fact industry standard, and educate the client that yeah, you can't, if you were to put every single waste piece, these small cuts in a wall, you're going to have tape and seams and more screws, and then you'll have, whether you're doing screws or nails, you could have pops, you can have cracks. I mean, it's going to create more issue. And so it was just education, right? And so I always tell
Yeah.
clients now, maybe not getting into the drywall example, but with tiles, a good example. We're going to have a waste, right? You have to plan for cuts, and this is part of going into it that you have to look. We're gonna competitively bid each line item. All of them are including waste. There will be waste, but if there's excessive waste, that's on the subcontractor because it's competitively bid. And so if they order too much material, they're losing on their bottom line, but it doesn't cost you money because we are cost plus and we have competitively bid this line item.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So for you, Lexi, one of the most difficult things I would imagine for designers, you have this creative side. That's why you're so successful and talented in your design. But then you have the logistics of entrepreneurship and running the business. How do you navigate between the two, between the creative side and then the pragmatic, business side?
That's a really good question. So I think building a team has really allowed me to do both. When I first started, I was doing everything from ordering, tracking, returns, anything and everything that we do here, ordering samples. And I've been able to offload that on to different team members. So I have an operations manager that helps me, with client invoicing, and so that I can focus more kind of on big picture. And then I am I am the only lead like principal designer, and so I'm involved in every project. I want to be involved with the clients. So when I meet with clients, I want to be the person that meets with them, and I want to also be involved in the sourcing. But I've realized over time, I don't have to source every little detail to get kind of that Lexi Westergard Design look. I know where I want my hand involved, which is typically the beginning, picking tiles and paint colors. And then maybe I don't need to pick the plumbing fixture or hardware for every space. And then I really like to get involved in the furnishings part. So maybe I'm not selecting every piece of furniture, or maybe I'm doing like the living room, like the main spaces. But I really am heavily involved in the fabrics and the rugs, and that's where I shine. And the accessorizing, that's kind of like the last layer. That's where I shine. But I think also that's been able to help me kind of balance both, because I mean, as a business owner, there's a lot of things to do. Um, and then also being kind of over the design aspect, that's another big part of my business, is time blocking. That's been huge for me. I have throughout the years been into time blocking and then out, but this year I've kind of set up my schedule where I know I'm creative at the beginning of the day. So I have certain days that I'm working on client projects, and I have certain days set aside where I'm meeting with clients, and I try to stack that, because you're in that mind frame of creating, and then to switch gears to a meeting and then go back to creating is kind of hard. So I find that if I can kind of focus my energy that day on one big task, we have our internal meetings kind of back to back as well. Obviously, if clients want to meet on a day that I typically would be in office, we will switch that around, but we do already have that time block, which allows my assistant to be able to schedule things better, and it's easy to know where to put them.
So with time blocking, how long did it take you to implement that? Like at what point
Uh,
of your career?
oh, well, I did it early on. So I did it probably 2020. So maybe like 5 years, 2019. And it was back when I was working out of my home office. My whole team was in one office space, and we would time block based on more project. And we kind of would work on a project at the same time and be like, okay, from this time to this time, we're working on it. But I kind of fell out of the groove of it, to be honest, and I just implemented it again this year. And I've implemented more where I give myself time and put it in my calendar. I used to think that it would be annoying to have too many things in my calendar. It would overwhelm me, but it actually allows me to free up my time and my mental capacity, where I'm not having to figure out things. It's like, oh, okay, that's a client meeting. I know I could meet at this time or this time during this week. That's available. And then setting time frames, I think, is helpful, because I mean, you could take an hour to accomplish something, or 30 minutes, depending on how much time you have. And I think setting, like, our meetings, I'm like, these should not be more than 45 minutes, our internal meetings, because like then we're just chatting, we're wasting time. And so it's like 45 minutes in and out. If we do like a little training after, sometimes it will be longer, but for the most part, it's like 30 to 45 minutes is plenty of time. And if it goes an hour, now it's pushing into my other activities, or I don't know, activities is the right word. It's not like I'm playing pickleball, but my other tasks that I'm accomplishing. I do wish I was playing pickleball more, but
No, that's funny. That's good. With you, I'm sure it's very similar though. I mean, being a designer, being a builder, you have this time blocking, you have your schedule set for the day, your creative time in the morning, as you mentioned, but the fires come up, the problems come up, the client call comes up. Hey, I need to address this. How do you balance just those crises that come up on a regular basis and stay true to the time blocking, to be as, proficient and organized as you can?
I have to say, we don't have a ton of calls that come up. I'm going to knock on wood with like client problems. I do have, for our Flagstaff project, I have Sierra, one of our technical designers. She's kind of oversees. So if the contractor has questions, he's going to her. So that helps, I think, as well. But we also use Slack. I don't know if you're familiar with Slack.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be very helpful, because our clients can kind of write on there and my whole team sees it. So if it's like an invoicing question, Amanda knows to respond. Or if it's a question about when something's going to be delivered, they can kind of field those. And so before I even can go to it to respond, my team has already taken care of it, which is really nice. But I will say, another thing that we do is we do weekly updates. And so our clients aren't really coming to us for updates, because I always tell my team, if they're coming to us asking a question, we're not doing our job and we're not
Mhm.
telling them enough information so they are feeling out of the loop. Even if it is, there's nothing going on that week that we're still just waiting for furniture to arrive, we will just let them know, hey, we're still waiting for XYZ to come in. ETA is this, and have a great week. So I think communication is a big part of it. And I like to be told what's going to happen next. I mean, if I've worked with anyone, not necessarily design, but like something else, I'm like, okay, well, what are we doing like next week? What's coming next, and what are our big goals? So I like to know what's going to come next. So I know that I want to provide that to my clients as well, so they can feel comfortable during the process.
I love that. I tell our team all the time that we should be playing offense, not defense, and
Mm-hmm.
be the aggressor in a way that, the problem is, I'm sure you've experienced this, Lexi, is that when a client feels that they have to ask you continually to follow up on questions they have, or no one's on the job site, or where are we at, even if you're at, site work doing masonry, or you're at drywall and it's curing. I mean, there's certain stages where you can't have 100 people in the home, and communicating that so the client doesn't feel that they have to micromanage you puts them at ease, because they're like, Lexi knows what she's doing. She has a plan. She's on top of it. I don't have to follow up. She's organized. Because the problem is, like, if you're not communicating, then they feel that they have to manage the project. And now, you're trying to play the, defense the rest of the project. And I don't want to say defend yourself, but defend your process and systems. And it can become, it can really deteriorate that relationship with the client.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you find to be your biggest pain points as a designer?
Oof, that's a good question. My biggest pain points. I would honestly say, I'm laughing because involves contractors, but I would have to say
That's
during
good.
the
Yeah.
construction phase, I don't know how many contractors will email us a question and it's like, just look at the drawing, like just look at the spec schedule, and sometimes we'll placate them and just send them, that information. But there's been a lot of, I would say, not necessarily you, working with you isn't like this, but there's other contractors that we're having to give them more information when they already have all the information. I mean, we've even had a contractor that lost the build book and he never told us. And the client was like, yeah, he hasn't had that for months. And I'm like,
Oh my
well, no
gosh.
wonder he's asking me a million questions. But that was literally the least of the worries with that project. But yeah, I think that that's a big pain point. And then honestly, that's all I can think of. And then timelines, timelines always shift. So figuring out install is always tricky with new builds because it always takes a little longer. One piece can set back a project quite a bit of time. And so that can be tricky. Like we had an install set for December, and now we're in February, and we actually had to move it back another week because the fireplace wasn't going to be there in time. And I'm like, we can't have furniture come in when the fireplace is installed and it's going to have a stone wall above it. And so I'm like, we need to push it back a week just to be safe. And so there's always those challenges. And I think you just have to be flexible. And because I've been doing this so long, that doesn't stress me out. Probably it's like, I mean, we're not brain surgeons here. It's like,
Mhm.
it's not the end of the world if something goes wrong because most mistakes can be fixed. And so I think sometimes after my team that, because they're like, oh my gosh, this fabric is not out of stock, and I'm like, well, we'll just reselect. It's not that big of a deal. And she's like, oh really? Okay. I was so stressed to tell you. It's like, no, it's really not that big of a deal. Like, sure, it's sometimes sad. And then what ended up happening is it was miscommunication. And then the vendor was like, oh no, that fabric is available. And it's like, well, you just caused us 2 hours of stress. Thank you for that. Um, but yeah, I think that's probably the big pain point. What about you? What do you feel like are the big pain points?
That's a really good question. I think one of the big ones for us is pricing and, that preliminary budget. It's almost like, and I'll kind of skip to the end here, but, when we can get to that point where we sit down with the client and when we do our presentations, we have a high and a low. So we always have a bid that's per every plan and spec, every wish list item that the client had. And then we also have gone ahead and worked with our designer and our architect on some preliminary VE, value engineering, so that when they sit down for that meeting, we have the high and the low. But the point being is that the projects that we're doing are so complex, as you can imagine, Lexi. And, you know, typically it's a year pre-construction and we're working with you and we're working with our designers and we're going through selections. But think you're picking tile, on an 8,000 square foot house, from 10 different suppliers, manufacturers. And then you have countertops from, 5 different manufacturers, and you may have 60 slabs, and then some may have integrated sinks. And so you just think the level of detail is so high. And as much as you have budgets and you work on this with our designers and our architects, there's just a lot of variables that in defense of our design team are even outside of their control, right? Because the market is the market. Like we don't, inflation is, has happened. I mean, that's been a real thing for us the last few years. And so sometimes I think my pain point is as I network with other contractors and builders and even clients is that in some ways it's almost shocking sometimes the numbers that come through, the bids that come through, even as much as we control our database and we track these things and we have a good feel for what things cost. And so I think my pain point is just really taking that original concept from day one of the goal of the project and getting through pre-construction, making sure that budget lines. Because what we do so much work in pre-con that once the budget or the project goes vertical, we feel very confident that we can build it for that price and we have the right trades and but it's really that pre-con process balancing the cost of a project with so many unknowns.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially post COVID, like you mentioned, pricing has increased tremendously. And I mean, even we do provide like furniture budgets. We like to kind of give preliminary numbers like based on rooms, but we're constantly having to change those because our vendors used to just increase prices once a year. Now they're increasing quarterly sometimes. And so it's really hard to keep up with that. And it's actually sad, to be honest, because what you could furnish a home for 2020, it's like you could maybe get a few rooms. And so
Mhm.
I think that that's always a sticker shock to our clients. And obviously, like at our level, like we're choosing things that are more high end and will last, where you can go to IKEA and furnish a room for, not very much, but what you see in our portfolio is kind of what I tell our clients is kind of our two pricing tiers that we offer. But yeah.
I have a few more pain points I'll share in a second, but going back
Okay.
to, yeah, I have some good ones for you. But, for you, Lexi, as I think about the comment you just made, I would imagine it's tough too because there's so many variables when you hit order. Like you're trying to order before that price increase, but then there's a cost to stage it, to store it, to hold it
Mm-hmm.
before delivery. How does that play a role in the logistics of when you order it to how long you store it and how those fees can incur? And I mean, they're not cheap.
No, they're not. And it's tricky because it's like a delicate dance. Like you want to have it ordered soon enough so everything comes for install, but you don't want to order it too soon so everything's sitting in their occurring storage fees. But we're transparent with that. Typically, if it's a build, delivery, storage, and um, like inspecting when they kind of will receive it and inspect it, we say that fee is about 15 to 18% of what the furniture budget is.
Mhm.
Um, and then we keep track of all those numbers. And if the project goes over, they may need to pay a little bit more, but we let them kind of know where they're at in that. But yeah, it's tricky because a lot of our stuff that's custom does take a long time to make. And so realistically, before we used to be able to do like drywall phase, you'd start furnishings and order that. But now it's like we need to be a year before it's completed because some of the lead times are just ridiculous. And luckily but unluckily, this project has been pushed back, the Flagstaff project, a couple months. So now like everything will be there, but it's like we would have had to make another delivery for those last little few items, which that's kind of what we'll do, is deliver the bulk of the things. And if one or two items we're waiting on, we won't wait on those because we don't want them to incur their fees, extra fees. So
Yeah, it's smart. I mean, that's a whole nother element when you're ordering custom furniture. Previously they may do it in 4 months. Now it's 8 or 12. And so trying to balance the custom
mm-hmm.
to stock to, just some, and you're working with so many manufacturers and all of them. How do you stay on top of that from all the different requirements and lead times as they're changing, depending on you may have the same manufacturer, but all their product lines could be totally different.
We keep it in our software. We have in our notes kind of what their lead times are, and we know which ones kind of take a while and which ones, when you're sourcing, you can kind of see if it's like a ready ship item, if it's in stock or not. But yeah, and luckily I have a procurement person that handles all of that and tracks it, and spreadsheets, and all the organization to keep us on top of it, for sure.
It's funny because we do the same thing. And so a couple pain points that I have is like, um, I'm not going to call out any trade partners, but what's funny that you'll get a laugh at is, I, our team does a really good job of understanding the spec, right? So they'll take your spec, Lexi, make sure that it's right. We order it. We have it in the documents. We put it in the contract. We subcontract all of our trade partners. And I'll give one recent example. So we were doing the interior of a pool, and here in Phoenix, we can't do the interior until we get C of O. So, we're pretty much at the end of the build. You get close of occupancy, final inspection, which essentially means the client can move into the house. We can put furniture into the house. So we're kind of doing our final punch. So in our contract, we have the interior finish of the pool specified. We've called them 3 times, the day of. Superintendent calls them, hey, just confirming it's going to be this color. Yep, we're good. Got it. So you just trust that that this has all taken place, and they come out with the machine to do the interior. They have the hopper, they spray it. And again, as it dries, we realize it's the wrong color. And you're like, we've gone through this how many times? We've talked about this for a year. And now they got to remove it and take it out. And the client's like, how did you miss this? Like, how could this come up? Again, it's not that the client is mad at us, but they're just, it's at the end. They don't want, their pool remodeled right away, even though for us, it's a pretty easy fix. But I've seen this more and more, that we'll order the correct tile and then we've spoken about it, and then the wrong box shows up. And, it's almost like to a level we have to, our trade partners are busy. I get it. They're working with, in some cases, a limited workforce. They're overworked. They don't have a lot of time off. But in some cases, I tell our team, you really have to, you said this early on, Lexi, glorified babysitter. You have to really be dialed in. It's one thing to have the email and the contract and the phone call, but you almost have to, when that hopper shows up and they're doing the interior, I need to check the specs and read it and make sure it matches at that level of micromanagement, because these things happen. The installers are doing their day to day, and in most cases, not paying attention to what the final spec should be.
That is an expensive mistake that they made. I can't even imagine.
Well, when you'll laugh, gosh. Just to that point, it's funny. We were doing, a net zero build. This is an energy efficient, sustainable home, off the grid. And we had worked countless hours in pre-construction to make a design so that there were no penetrations through the roof. The roof is like a R50, think of it like ice cream sandwich. So it's like this really insulated roof structure. So we didn't want to cut a hole in it. And so the exhaust fans were going to go through the exterior of the building, and we're going to have them waterproof. And sure enough, the installer shows up, client's out of town. My superintendent had to run to Home Depot and just drills a nice big hole right through the roof structure. And it's like, just sometimes, as much as you've communicated and laid it out, it's whether it's creatures of habit, it's, so I think that's what one of the points that customers don't see is that as prepared as you and I can be, and as much homework as we do, mistakes happen. It's part of what we do. And that's why you need to have a good designer, why you need to have a good builder.
Yeah, definitely. It's just construction. It's the
It's
name of
just,
the beast, you know? Like things go wrong all the time, which I'm sure you're well aware of.
what advice would you give to your younger self if you were starting your design company today and being as seasoned and savvy as you are now, Lexi?
Ooh, that is a good question. I would probably tell my younger self. That is a really hard question because here's the thing. Obviously, like there's things I wish I would have changed, but at the same time, at the end of the day, all those like hardships of growing a business led me to where I am now. But one thing I think I regret is I did go to design school, but I never did learn AutoCAD. So I have a team that does that. So I think I would have told myself to take a class in that and maybe take a few other classes that could have helped me um, get to point B from A lot quicker. Another thing is I never worked for a design firm like mine. And so that was a huge learning curve of growing a business and learning not only the design side of everything, but also the back end. And, that took quite a bit of time to fine tune and develop over the years. And so I think that I could have gotten to where I am quicker, but at the same time I also grew my business as my kids were young. Like I started
Mm-hmm.
my business when my son was 6 weeks old. who
Wow.
who who does that?
Yeah.
Who in their right mind says, you know what, it sounds like a good idea to start a business. I have a 2-year-old and a 6-week-old at home. But kind of how that happened was I wanted to start my own business when my daughter was about a year old. And I was like, I think I really want to try this. My friend was redoing her home. And I said, let me help you for free and I'll get some portfolio images. Well, I ended up not ever getting those portfolio images, but she was a nurse. She still is to this day. And she had a client that she would talk about like, oh, my designer friend's helping me design my house. Well, he was newly divorced, moving into a home and needed someone to furnish it. And so he's like, hey, get your designer friend to help me. I was pregnant at the time and I had complications with my second pregnancy. My son was on my nerves. I couldn't even walk. And I had like some preterm labor where I had to go into the hospital a couple times. And so I was like, no, there's no way I can. And then he was patient. And then 6 weeks after I had him, he's like, okay, is she ready? Like I need a designer. And I just knew like, it's hard to get your first client. That's a hard thing to do. And I didn't have, other people in my family that were redoing homes that I could use as a guinea pig. And he hired me without even looking at any portfolio images, which I had none. And he trusted me, had no revisions. And then I spent, a lot of money to get those professional photography shots and post them on social media and create a website from that. And so I don't have a regret in that. I would literally be sourcing in the middle of the night when I'm feeding my son. And it was kind of wild and a blur, but I wouldn't change it. It's kind of part of my journey. And I love that my kids kind of at the beginning would kind of come to job sites with me and see that. And we would go sourcing for accessories as a family. We go to Scottsdale Quarter and go shop, get accessories for install. And so it's just kind of quite different to what it is now, but it was a fun part of the journey too, for sure.
Was the plan always for you to be a designer?
So I actually was going to go to hair school. I talked to your daughter about this a little bit because she does hair, right? So
Yeah, she does.
I actually have my cosmetology license and I was going to go to hair school and I did hair for a year. but my junior year in high school, we had a paper that we had to do, probably English. I don't even know what class. And you had to pick two careers. And I was like, well, I'm going to be a hairstylist, so I'll choose that. And then I just thought, maybe I'll do design. My mom was very into design. Like my house was always very, she always made it feel very homey and cute, was always wanting to put wallpapers up and change things around. My room was the cutest out of all my friends. And I like how that impacted me. I mean, I think anyone can close their eyes and go back to their childhood bedroom and picture it exactly, or their the kitchen and living room. And I wanted to have that same impact on other people. And so I did that little thing, and that's kind of what I think planted the seed, because I was not one of these designers were constantly changing my room, designing it. No, my mom did all that. Like I didn't do any of that. And so then I ended up working for a year in hair, and then my friend wanted to move to Hawaii for the summer. We were 19 at the time, and I was like, sure, why not? Like I'm never going to be able to live in Hawaii. So I lived in Hawaii for summer. And then when I came back, I realized, maybe I don't want to do hair. And that's when I went to design school. And so I really loved design school, and it taught me a lot. We didn't learn AutoCAD. It was a vocational school. And so, you learned color theory, history of design, furniture, things like that. But I did work in the industry for a little bit. I worked for a couple furniture companies where we would go out to their homes and, help design it and whatnot. But I didn't do any construction side until I started my business. Yeah.
And here you are now, conquering and doing these incredible projects.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy because I think if I could have dreamed this up, I wouldn't have. Like, I never think I would have thought I would have been here. I always thought like, oh, it'll be like a little hobby side thing, kind of fun. And then the demand just came too big where I had to grow a team. And I think that's part of the best part of owning a business. I love my team. They're all really good at what they do. And I love the collaborative effort that we have. We are very collaborative. We bounce ideas off each other. And I think that that's when the design can get really unique and special.
So it's such an interesting perspective, Lexi. It's funny how, you have these experiences that impact you, and here you are now building your business. And, I think there's some credibility to your comment that it's hard. There may be some small things. I look back at my career, maybe marketing, maybe, systems, maybe organization, some of those things that I would look at. But at the end of the day, you are here because you're here. Like you had to go through that growth, to learn it yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think one thing I would probably tell myself is when you're small, act like you're big. Like run your business as a big business, because when you grow, then you kind of have growing pains, and then you're having to come up with all the systems and processes. And then that can be very stressful. But, we have those today, and we're still always tweaking those. Something will happen where something gets done wrong, and I'm like, is there a system? Let's create a process for that. And my team probably gets so annoyed with me, but I'm big onto that.
Yeah, it's so true. So what do you do for fun?
I love to travel. I love to travel with my husband, my kids. We go to Wyoming every year. My husband's family has a cabin there, so we love to be outdoors. We love to hike, and I love to play pickleball, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes,
my activities. I don't play enough. I feel like it's hard to find the time. I love to read. I'm big into reading, and I like to work out. I like to go on walks. I'm not like nothing too interesting, but I like to be active for sure.
So what do you have that's upcoming and exciting?
So we have a couple new projects that are super exciting. We are in the middle of launching our French Chateau project, which is this 15,000 square foot home It's incredible. It has a basketball court, and it was a labor of love. It was like about 3 years that we worked on it. I
Wow.
think probably 4 for the homeowners, maybe 5 with anyway, it's definitely a labor of love. And so we're revealing that. I actually think we just revealed the kitchen today, and butler's kitchen and living room. So that's exciting. And then we have an install up in Flagstaff, which is a project I'm super excited about. The client was not afraid of color. We have lots of fun colors, and it feels a little unique than anything that we have in our portfolio right now. And then we are working on another huge new build that we have a lot of other little projects, but one that I'm excited about is a new build that we're building with our mutual friend Brady Fenn.
Yeah.
And that hopefully will break ground in a couple months. That's, I think, about 12,000 square feet, maybe a little more. It has like a shooting range, gym. It's going to be really cool. And the level of details we have in that home are pretty incredible. So I'm excited about that for sure.
Is that one a client build, or is that going to be on market?
Client.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So is a client. We've been working with them actually for a couple years, and I think they're finally ready to move forward. We had to make a few changes just this year. So make it.
Yeah, and it's always a long game, right? The thing is, typically these things don't happen overnight. The project that you are breaking ground on today was 2-3 years in design, and the projects that you're showing on your Instagram, the social media, were designed 3 years ago, 2 years ago, right? That are just now getting published.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's, what's good about it is I look back at the design, I'm like, I would make all these selections today. Like there's a few things that are out of stock that we had to change out, but no, I think it is going to be a really beautiful project. We're excited about it for sure.
Well, Lexi, you've been incredible. Appreciate the friendship and projects we've had. For those listening, where can they find you?
So Instagram is probably the best, Lexi Westergard _design, and my website, Lexi Westergard Design. We recently just redid the website, and I'm super proud of that. It looks really good. That's probably it. I think I have a Facebook, but I'm not active on it. I think it just posts whatever is on Instagram.
I think that's the case for a lot of us. Well, appreciate you making time. Thank you, Lexi.
Thanks for having me, Brad.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.